Welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
All right. Well, April and I are trying to get ready for this little conversation. Are you sure you're ready, April?
I am so ready.
Okay. All right, guys. So we're going to dive into what I hope will become a book, God willing. You know, you never know with these things, exactly how they will evolve over time. So, but I have felt like my thoughts and kind of communication, things that I really want to talk about that I feel like is sort of missing when I think about, you know, a book that I wish existed. This book is called The Ruling Household. And so, yeah, I'm going to begin to try to write that book. Now, the way that, you know, my podcast kind of functions is that I have conversations about things I'm thinking about in real time. And if I'm writing a book, then you guys are going to get a lot of excerpts from it and conversations around that. And that'll hopefully also help me, you know, write a better book, edit it, you know, get your feedback. So anybody who's listening to this, please, thank you for listening in advance. Thank you for, you know, giving any feedback. I don't know what the final state of this will ultimately be, or if the book will emerge the way I think it will. But yeah, I appreciate you guys listening, and I am excited to get April's thoughts on this as well. So this little introduction that I started to write around is called just The Ruling Household, an introduction. And so here is this little essay that introduces the concept. What do you want to be when you grow up? What a question. There's an intuition deep within the heart of Western people that providing the radical freedom necessary to consider a question this open-ended is the great achievement of our age. It's the one thing we can all agree to celebrate. In America, it's what brings us together as a people. In fact, in the absence of discovering a higher value, providing and experiencing this freedom becomes the default purpose of life. It's the end we're aiming at. It's what our forefathers died to give us and what their sons died to preserve. It's the highest good. You and I are living in a civilization that is nearing the end of this experiment. The experiment that freedom is ultimate and that every systemic problem can be solved by applying more freedom. More money provides economic freedom. More equality provides more political freedom. And new technologies promise to provide freedom from everything else. I'm not here to argue that a certain amount of freedom is helpful. I'm grateful that I live in a free country, and I wave my flag on the 4th of July and say a prayer of gratitude on Memorial Day for the men and women who died for the freedom I enjoy. But here's the thing. Freedom is a means and not an end. Freedom exists to give us the ability to pursue something. It's not something we pursue as an end in itself. Once you've had enough of it, you must do something with it. That's what this book is about. And on the 4th of July and Memorial Day, millions of Americans grill burgers and hot dogs with their family and friends. And I've often wondered as I put slices of American cheese on my grass-fed beef, if what we're experiencing in this country is worth the sacrifice of so many. The answer of this book is yes, but almost no one in our country remembers why. It's not the food and it's not the freedom. It's the family and the faith that these things help you build. This is the highest thing a government can be expected to do. It can't provide salvation from our sins, but it can provide enough freedom for us to build families and pursue our faith in peace. Family and faith are both a means and an end. Raising a family is the first step on a journey towards something. Families are vehicles that take us to a place where we all want to go. In a family, we experience the kind of relational connection that gives us a foretaste of our journey's end. We build families to build households, and households are the basic unit of the government in the kingdom of God. The Bible is not confusing on this point. It's right there on the very first page. God creates the first male and female, and he does not ask them what they want to be when they grow up. That's way too much freedom. God, like a good father, hands us some basic instructions. These instructions are a blueprint for constructing the vehicle that takes us on the journey of life. Quote, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule. That's Genesis 1:28. Equipping you to follow this blueprint of being fruitful, multiplying, filling, subduing, and ruling is the purpose of this book. It begins with a family, but it ends with being a ruling household. The question is not what do you want to be, but where are you going? Who are your companions? What will take you there? And why does all of this ultimately matter? Asking what you want to be assumes that the basic unit in society is the individual. This was best put by tech investor, and startup guru Naval Ravikant when he tweeted, quote, The reality is life is a single player game. You're born alone, you're going to die alone. I've never read a more perfect articulation of the belief that has steered us so far off course. Life is not a single player game. Life is a family game. We're born into a family. We live our life with family. And unless something goes terribly wrong, we'll die surrounded by our family. And yes, family is for everyone. It's for the unmarried as much as for the married. Once you understand that what we're talking about is not the modern nuclear family, but this ancient thing called a household. The nuclear family only includes a father, mother, and their children. The household includes the nuclear family, parts of the extended family, and for followers of Jesus, many more. But because Christians have been just as caught up in what they want to be as everyone else, it's possible many of you reading this have never been exposed to a household, let alone a ruling household. The Genesis 1 blueprint is likely to seem like a relic of ancient history. That's why I'm writing this book. In my first book, Family Revision, I explored the biblical vision for the family. And in this book, I'd like to guide you through the biblical vision for the household. Our journey will begin with Adam and Eve, move through the patriarchs in Genesis, explore the dynastic families in the Hebrew scriptures, and understand how the gospel of the kingdom described in the New Testament gives us an updated mandate to the ruling household. But first, let's open our Bibles to page 1 and examine the household blueprint Genesis 1 provides for the structuring of all human societies. Okay, that's where the introduction ends. So, yeah, April, any thoughts? What does that start for you?
You'll have to rein me in and bring me back if I get too far off into future chapters.
Okay.
Try to keep it at the introduction level. But I think one reaction I had when you were reading was to that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I didn't realize how profound of a question that is. And it's become such a typical question for people to ask children, especially because of the when you grow up component. And it is a question that you can ask in a society where we just have so many possibilities. But when you think about what you're meaning by that, I think what someone might want to be saying there is like, what are you interested in? I'm trying to get to know you, little child, and I'm curious what things you like to do with your time, or what kind of brain you have. Are you more mechanical? Are you more artistic? But we've boiled it down to what do you want to do when you grow up? So it discounts so many things, like who are you right now? What kinds of things are you into right now? And then it's like assumption that you're going to be doing something that it sounds like a job when it's asked, what job do you want to have when you grow up? So it's assuming that you're going to have a job or a career.
Right.
And then it's like a very individualistic question,
Right.
It's flies in the face of all of the things of like, well, the analogy where we're comparing like a, stereotypical American boy growing up in Atlanta, Georgia with a first century Jewish boy who is like super multi-generationally connected and does everything for his family, everything based out of his family. And
Right.
Anyway, so this question is very American, very modern, and very against Genesis 1.
Well,
Much different questions you can ask.
Right. And a big part, we're picking on this question not as if it's evil to ask. Like you said, there's lots of good reason to ask a question like this. The actual interesting conversation is, why has this become the primary question everyone does ask? So it's okay to ask it. It's just that, what people don't ask as often is like, tell me about your family. Where did you grow up? Where are you planning to live when you grow up? And, what does your family do? Like, nobody asks what your family does. That is as if that's relevant to what you're going to want to, who you're going to want to be when you grow up. Again, then you have the identity like element of this question, which is that it assumes that if I don't know what I'm going to be, then who am I? Like, I don't have an identity. And so I think that sometimes you're trying to ask, what do you want to do? Maybe when you're trying to figure out what somebody enjoys. But when you ask somebody who they want to be, you're actually trying to ask them, what kind of self-imposed identity are you going to embrace for yourself? And, this is, I think, one of the greatest confusions of our culture, why I think it's understandable in a culture that's asking constantly a question like this and assuming that somebody can self-construct their identity, to say, I don't want to be a man. I don't want to be a woman, And so this idea that I am being that there's being something imposed upon me, then what you start to look for is a technology that can somehow free you from the constraints of whatever self-constructed identity you really want. And again, we see this as just, it's really important to just say the intuition of the Western culture is that's always good. Even if you say to yourself, well, I don't know if people should be changing their genders. Most people ask that question only at that point, right? Only at the point at which maybe somebody's making those decisions. We don't ask that question of the technology itself. And is it a good idea to have access to this technology? We have technologies that basically free us from almost every normally self-imposed identity. I get on a plane, I can live in another part of the country, I can shop at a grocery store and not have to worry about whether or not I'm going to get the kind of food that I want. If, no matter where I live, there's going to be people that will be keeping me safe. I mean, on and on and on. All our society has to create the kind of freedom so that I can live out this totally self-referential, hyper individualized life that I have decided that I like. And so the part of the assumption as well is like, I'm constantly like digging down into this sort of place of my desires to figure out if I have to find my identity there, then, and I wrote a whole essay on how I think this is really why sexual orientation has basically created people's identities, that because they're looking for some kind of place that inside of them, some feeling that they're having that's distinctive to them, in order to find grounding for latching their identity to that. And so what we're talking about, what I'm going to try to articulate in this book, is this whole idea of the household providing so much of that, and that we really need to think about how to do that for our children. But I have to start with the fact that this is going to feel very counterintuitive to many Western people. They're going to hear this and they're going to say that violates individual freedom. Right. And I have to say from the very introduction, yes, it does. And so we have to talk about that. And you can certainly go way too far with that. There's ways in which families or households can crush an individual, but we are hypersensitive to that, and we have almost no sensitivity to the other problem, which is children need an identity that is rooted outside of themselves. And it's very dangerous to send them off in the world and say, go find it. We can't help you at all.
Yes.
So like when you think about like the whole idea of the household providing that, and maybe even this tension between the freedom that we want to provide as sort of Western people versus what the scripture is describing, how have you kind of wrestled through that tension? Is it a good thing for the household to provide a lot of that identity? Can freedom go too far?
Need a blueprint to revise your family to be a multi-generational team on mission? The book, Family Revision by Jeremy Pryor, is the book that summarizes all the big picture ideas you hear on this podcast. Available on Amazon or familyteams.com.
I think it's a beautiful mix, because I think I find myself as a mother asking these questions, of my newborn, when this baby first comes out and I'm looking at them. I think I had realized this by the time I had 3. So I'm like looking at my 3rd child and I'm saying, who are you? Because I know that I don't know, because now I've had 2 kids and I've experienced this twice, and I'm realizing I don't know you. This is so exciting. I get to figure out who this little creature is that God has given me, and like what her talents are, what her abilities, like what has God put inside of her that's going to be unique and special. And so I think there is definitely this element of figuring out who each one of your children is and what God has poured stuff into them, and it's going to come out at different times and different seasons in their lives, being, prompted by different things in different seasons. And I can't wait to discover those things. So there's this element of discovery, of, an interest and a desire to get to know them. And yet we get to, as the parents of the household, as, the ones who are, we have a literal home, and then we have a household, which would be like our businesses and any maybe household employees we have, and our children, and anyone that we're enfolding at the time, and all these things. So in that position, we have the ability to create a culture in our home. And as culture creators, we are deciding what we believe, what behaviors are going to be acceptable in our home, how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to treat people that walk in our door, all those things, the kinds of foods we're going to eat, the kinds of experiences we're going to have, how we're going to craft a week, how we use our time, what we value. It's endless. The things that as parents, you have to decide of what you want as a culture in your home.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege and it's a weighty responsibility to have to kind of wade through all of those things. It takes time. It takes lots of talking, lots of conversation, lots of like becoming one. It's a real gift to have a household to work on so that you can become one with your spouse. It's like a massive tool. And so as you're creating those like a household that has all those dynamics in it, God's a blessing. If God is blessing you with one child and then a second child, and then you're learning how to enfold them into that while you're discovering who they are.
I like what you said. There's a culture in the house, and every decision you make is limiting the freedom of every child that comes into your house. When you decide to paint the nursery pink, you have imposed violently upon your child your culture for what you think. You put it neutral. You've also imposed a culture upon your child. You hang something in their room. You give them a binky. You don't, and on and on and on. And so one of the things that we want to expose here is that every family has to do this. This is why I'm so against the quote from that Naval, which I love that guy. I've learned a ton from him, but this is where I think he's gone really wrong. We're not in a single player game. That's not how it works. Like, you're born and suddenly you are immersed in a culture that is so unique. Potentially, you could be in a Muslim country, you could be in an Amish family, you could be in any kind of family. Imagine the incredible diversity of the families of the earth. And I think that what I'm trying to say is that there's a weird intuition in the heart of Western people that's growing, that because when you invite a baby into that world, you're making all these cultural decisions, that you're limiting their freedom, and that is bad. Why do we think that is bad? Because we are mistaken that we think freedom is an end in itself. And so if I can provide the maximum amount of freedom, so, okay, I had to decide to paint the walls of the nursery blue, I had to make some decision, but as soon as possible, I'm going to sit down and look at my 3-year-old and say, what do you want? And I want to bend everything about this family culture, our entire family history, every root structure, every value around the personal preferences of this child. And that's what good parenting is, because freedom is an ultimate value. And so I'm trying to say that idea that freedom is an ultimate value is broken. I mean, virtually every philosopher says that. This is actually not hard to discover. It's clear that freedom has to be an end in itself, or a means to an end and not an end. If you think about it, just dump tons and tons of freedom on a person, that doesn't get you anywhere. Like, freedom exists always to do something with. So this is actually not controversial amongst philosophers. This is controversial, very controversial amongst sort of, I would say, Western people who have not thought about this very deeply. And so I think it forces you to ask, okay, freedom for what, right? What is the purpose? What is the end? And we have to have that conversation, because that will determine how we use all that freedom. And so let's say the freedom is, and this is what I'm looking at Genesis 1, and God has provided this amazing context, this garden, Adam and Eve, he brought them into his, their nursery, quote unquote, he decided all kinds of things. He created the world. He created this, all these fruit trees. He just designed this thing called the family. He imposed enormous amounts of his own will in order to create a culture to bring us into, and didn't even stop there. But then once he created that first family, he tells them their purpose. He doesn't say your purpose is to find out who you want to be when you grow up. He says to them, imposes upon them a mission: be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and rule. And if you get off that train at any point, you're going to be in a very confusing place. Yeah. And that's kind of where we're going next in the book. So this idea that freedom exists for something and not as an end, we have to let that go deep inside of our intuitions. Every time somebody wants more freedom, you need to say, for what end? Because oftentimes the end dictates the limits of that freedom, right? Like when you're playing soccer, you want enough freedom to play the game, but you want rules. You want a referee. You want to have clear boundary. You want to have all kinds of clarity. But then once you have all of those rules, and that you should only have as much rules as it takes to get to what you want, which is a truly flourishing game. Yeah, a game where everyone's having fun, everyone's learning. Like, and as soon as there's so much freedom that starts to break, now we don't know how to play the game. Now we're not having fun. Now we don't know where the goal is. Now we don't have a referee. As soon as the freedom starts to take away from the actual point, then you have to impose less freedom, more rules, more clarity, more culture. And so, this is part of I think the intuition that I'm trying to really stir up. I don't know if there's any last thoughts, the other April, about that.
Well, I think that it's really one skill that we need to become really good at is playing things out.
Yeah.
And so if you are able to use your imagination and to play out a scenario, like if I engage in this freedom, this is where it will lead me. And then this is where that will lead me. And then this is where then we will get better at understanding, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't take that freedom because it could end up, down this path. But I think in the American culture anyway, we have become so like instant gratification. And if I want it now, but this sounds really good to me now, that we have some people, I talk to many, many people who have lost the skill of playing things out, of thinking long term. And so it makes it very hard for them to think that freedom, like all freedom, isn't just the most awesome thing ever. And so, like you said, if you believe that you are on mission as believers, we have a mission given to us in Genesis 1, and then again in Matthew 28. And so we have these missions that we're on with the Lord, and he gives us the family in order, to carry out those missions. And in order to do that, we need to have boundaries, and we need to operate within the confines of marriage. We need to honor the covenant that we've made before the Lord between one man and one woman. We need to have the confines of, having like whatever physical house we're in, we need to steward those boundaries. Like it's just endless, on and on and on of the different, like you said, like if you're playing soccer, we need to have lines on the field to know if the ball was out or not. Like we have to have these types of things set up in our homes and our households so that we have the freedom to operate within that. When you homeschool, you have a lot of freedom. When you are an entrepreneurial, you have a lot of freedom in those things. When you engage in, there are different things that we can do that can give us freedoms, but how are we going to use those freedoms?
That's right. Yeah.
And to what end?
We have to answer this initial question, which is, what game are we playing? That's why I so reacted to the idea that somebody is finally saying this is a single player game. Now, once you say that, all of a sudden, just gobs and gobs and gobs of freedom beyond what you could possibly imagine starts to make some more sense, right? If this is a single player game and there's not a single person anywhere that can possibly impose on me anything, then then it starts to make sense of why I would want to be able to do surgery and change my gender and change it back. And like, it's a single player game. It's like, how you can't say anything to me. There's no collective game at all. But if it's a family game, if the game is building a ruling household, then we know what the freedom exists for. And we know when it's gone so far that it starts to completely destroy the whole point of the game. And that's what's happening.
It also sounds very lonely.
Oh, I know. Yeah, totally. God didn't, the first thing he says that's not good is, it's not good for man to be alone. He doesn't like the idea that this is a single player game. God, Adam did play a single player game for a couple of days in the garden, and God's like, that's a terrible idea. We got to get this guy a wife and get this family going. So awesome. Well, thanks, April. And as you guys are listening to this, this is just the beginning of a journey to really try to understand if this is a game of building a ruling household. What does that look like? Like, how can we create that? So that's where we're headed. That's what we'll start to tease out more and more through different tools and different conversations. So stay tuned, and we'll talk some more. Thanks, April.
See you later.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.